Call to order.
Yep.
Public Hospital District Number 14 County Board of Commissioners Affiliation Work Study Agenda, Thursday, June 13, 2019, from 4:30 to 6 p.m., Snoqualmie Valley Hospital, East-West Conference Room. Roll call, please.
President Norris.
She should be here
She
shortly.
should be here shortly.
Vice President Herron.
Here.
Secretary Spikers.
Here.
Commissioner Pollard.
Here.
Commissioner Carter.
Here. Okay, approval of agenda. Are you here?
Make the motion to approve the agenda.
And a second?
I second.
Okay. And approve topics of discussion. Okay, we will have
That's the agenda. Okay.
7 topics here. So the first is the due diligence summary updates. The second, definitive agreement. Third is trust. Fourth, land and building leases. Fifth is lease transferences. 6, certificate of need. And 7 is our timeline check. CEO, interim CEO, Dr. Rika, please.
Sure.
You may
Thank you. I'll start at the top. So as usual, we'll be spending a lot of time on one of the entries. We'll be spending a lot of time on number 3, the trust, tonight. But to go from the top and get you some updates on the other pieces, though. So the due diligence updates, we did just yesterday receive access to all of the information that Overlink, all the due diligence documents that Overlink has uploaded for us to review. And so our review process is just beginning. We have a very structured, so Steve has put together an amazing structured review process. So the review group that we'll put together, and then this will be the format that you'll see it. So we'll bring you the summary review. So it'll be talking about why it was we looked at that, what we found, what our concerns were, and then if there's ever a reason we needed to jump down and dive deeper into these or figures, we can. But this will be coming next. The next time we gather, this will be ready to go.
Can we see the overlay submission?
Yes, and that's what I was saying. As we go through it, as any pieces of it that we'll want to dive down deeper into in this affiliation.
Well, I mean,
first,
in
then we would.
the raw data, as they send it over, can we see that?
We would have to work on getting access to it. It's on a secure share site, but I don't see why not.
Well, generally due diligence is done by a due diligence review team, and then the results of the due diligence is brought to the board.
Is it public information?
Well, that's part of the reason you, with the due diligence, and this includes what we provided as well, you don't generally want to give up control of your documents, because then they're in somebody else's possession, and then they're exposed to review or potential review, and that's why it's set up this way, so the documents stay out of the public record.
Well, I'm concerned about the Public Records Act and whether, under the Public Records Act, we would have the right to see that.
Well, again,
Before it becomes filtered by the committee. If not, then that's fine, but if it's public information, then we should.
well, but it's not. It's not public
All right,
information.
thank you.
who are on the due diligence committee?
Steve, Skip, me, Jim Balda, the controller, and Rachel Slifka.
Does any of the commissioner at least can be part of that diligence committee? To be part of that committee?
No, I mean, there's no reason that commissioners, one or more, could be reviewing it as well. It's just not generally done because it's not a board level sort of project. I mean, that work is normally done by administrative staff, and then the report comes to the board.
But I guess when we're dealing with...
I'm not even sure where I would plug a board member in. I mean,
That's the group, and that's.
well, I would imagine that they would ask questions as soon as when you get a report. And you're going to be getting a report as part of the work study process. So that would be when the information would come. That's what could typically happen.
Well, I just think it's good that the board enters in at an early stage during policy formulation and not just rubber stamp what the board gives it.
I'm not sure what you mean by.
I don't think that's policy. I mean,
Yeah, I'm
I
not sure
would
what you mean.
prefer
Policy
to have,
formulation.
yeah, well, I would prefer to have our team, whom I trust, get down to the nitty-gritty and streamline some summaries and some issues for us to look at. Then if we have more questions, we can always ask for documents pertaining to each issue or documents pertaining to potential issues that are not,
Exactly.
that we thought about as commissioners and as duty that we do have. You know, I just don't think, I'd hate to interfere with administrative area parameters here. Because if we did have a commissioner, which is fine, I mean, if you want to observe, but it seems to me if someone was observing, they'd want to ask lots of questions and perhaps slow the process down. And I do not think that that would be wise.
And I don't think that there will be any redacted information there.
So-
It will come as it is, and then we'll
So-
ask the questions.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about this process. We just got the due diligence documents. And now, I know from the timeline when I reviewed before I came to the meeting, we were supposed to have something in place within a month.
Yeah.
So now we only have 30 days to review and sort things out. And I'm a little concerned, and that's if we want to have this in place by the end of the year. And I remember when you spoke to us at first, keep reminding me of the deadlines. And that's why I have looked at the deadlines. The deadlines say we have 30 days to get something hammered out. That means, I don't know how many documents there are, but I'm sure there's not 2 or 3.
There are a number of them.
And I'd rather get this, at least, that we can make a decision, or we can formulate some kind of, hammer out some kind of an agreement as a board. I do not want to slow the process down right at this point.
I just think there's something to be said for transparency at all levels of this process.
Well, it's
So
completely transparent.
that's why I think a board member sitting on the committee is just an observer, and not taking up a lot of time or asking a lot of questions.
Well, maybe-
Contributes to transparency.
Maybe it's the use of the term committee, because maybe I shouldn't have used that term. I mean, you have different people who have different skill sets reviewing different documents, so there's
It's a
probably,
committee. You can call it a working group, whatever you name it.
Well,
It's a
but-
group working together as a committee.
but they're not gonna be sitting around a table like this doing the work.
I'm not
Every-
sure.
Everybody's gonna be doing their own project and then writing up their portion of the report, and it'll get put into one large report that would come to the board. I mean, that's standard operating procedure. I mean, if you wanna vary from standard operating procedure, obviously that's your own call. But that's standard operating procedure, so it's not like we're sitting in a group having a conversation or even having a meeting. Everybody's gonna review their section and produce their report. So there really wouldn't even be anything to
So
observe.
they will not be meeting together to go over the report.
Not generally,
All
I
right.
mean,
Yeah, so,
That's fine.
and then I'll
Let's
give us
move on.
opportunity to, yeah, that's
That's a
fine.
report for you all.
Yes, thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
And in Finance Committee, 2 months ago, I think we talked about things like this that will also funnel through Finance Committee,
Right.
because that becomes an opportunity to dive in as
Absolutely.
well,
And if I can get,
Excuse me.
to come into here.
if I can get things out to the board, to be transparent to the rest of the board as soon as I can, I will. I believe in transparency too. And I do want the board to make a uniform decision, not just from the finance committee or any set number of individuals. I want to make sure that this is done correctly, but we will be taking it to the board. I'll send out information as soon as I get it. And we'll talk about it.
Well, it makes it more difficult now if you close the finance committee to the public and outsiders. It's just a recent development to close the finance committee. So once again, in terms of policy formulation, it's one step away from that good transparency. So I've said enough.
Okay, let's move on. Okay,
All right.
Dr. Rika?
So under definitive agreement, we've not had a preview yet. We do know that it is being worked upon. Ogden Murphy Wallace is, they're constructing it. You've had confirmation as well that they're doing that. So hopefully even though we've just been given access to the information, the due diligence information they've provided to us, it shouldn't slow the process down because the other work of the definitive agreement is still going on. That didn't wait on us to get access.
Okay. Well, I was more concerned about that because.
Same.
Same here.
Same.
Yeah.
And just insight into that, we were like, when are we going to get access? When are we going to
I
get
know.
access? Overlake, our compatriots at Overlake were saying, when are we going to get access? When are we gonna... So it was one whole person was holding up the process. So,
Not over.
not at Overlake. So it was equal.
Okay.
Anxiety about that.
All right.
Getting that through. But in regard to the definitive agreement, we did have a conference call 2 weeks ago so we were on the call as well as the Overlake team and their representation. And it was around the leasing and how are we going to approach the bondholders and what's the timing on that and what are exact questions in order to stay in compliance with our bond documents. And so it was really a great conversation. They were hoping to wait till we got an answer from the bondholders in regard to would they honor NUCO as being the leaser with the backup with the guarantor behind them of Overlake, and that was what we're going to be approaching the bondholders about. But receiving counsel not to approach the bondholders until we have the definitive agreement in place. You know, we're really saying, well, how do we craft the definitive agreement if we don't know what they're going to say? So back and forth. So it was a long conversation that really in the end resulted in Overlake saying, you know what, we're going to walk away from this conversation and look at having Overlake actually be the leaser. So backed by their bond rating.
Not the
They-
lessee.
The less.
The
sorry.
lessor versus
The-
the lessee.
The lessee.
The lessee,
Paying the
yeah,
bill.
okay.
The one paying- the one writing
I always
the
get
check.
those mixed up.
Thank you. The one writing the check. They're responsible for writing the
Yeah,
check,
that's right.
Okay.
rather than NUCO being the one writing the check.
That would make sense. Better bond rating, better, instead of some
Rating.
shell.
Very much
name.
streamlined. So that was not a decision made, that was, they were talking out loud and they have taken that for their own consideration. But it is very much streamlining the process. I don't know, do you want to say more, because you're
Well,
much more involved?
Yeah, because the bondholders are going to be concerned with what's the financial rating of the guarantor. And if Overlake is leasing, they're the guarantor.
Are they a double A or a?
They're
Or
A plus.
A plus.
So that will go a long way towards satisfying our bondholders. And, you know, Kim had said, we talked about, what we've talked about is not, I mean, the bondholders need to realize they're not in charge of making the agreements, but they will get to review the agreements. So we want to have things set pretty well before we say, okay, here's what it looks like, bondholders.
Okay.
Board seen it, then bondholders. You guys are more important, but the bondholders have something to say, and we think with having Overlake as the lessee, that will really go a long way to getting them to agree.
And the wisdom of setting up the
Well,
bond
okay,
document.
and then getting them to agree is not really right, because
Right.
if we have that, they have no choice
Right.
but to agree,
Yeah,
because it's
because
in the
that
covenant,
says we
and we don't
can.
want to give them the power of decision.
So they do not have veto rights over the final.
Not as long as we comply with the bond covenants, the promises we make.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
and we want to structure it that way.
An A rating or above.
Yep.
Because NUCO does not have a rating at all.
No, because it's a new.
But-
And they're brand new. They
But
don't have a rating.
Overlake can
Yeah,
guarantee
they're not-
that they do have a bond rating.
So if Overlake guarantees what we come up with NUCO, then it has a rating.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
Are they eligible for a bond rating?
Who, Nuco?
NUCO.
No, they're not.
Oh, they're not.
Because they're a new unknown entity, so it'd be very hard to get a bond
Oh, I
rating.
see.
But Overlake
It would be a
does have
wholly
a bond
owned
rating.
subsidiary
Okay.
Yeah,
that would be basically a shell company.
Yeah.
You're right.
yeah,
For purposes of this
Yeah,
agreement, which
that's-
would not deal with it.
Mhm.
yeah. And the check comes from Overlake, who has the rating, and is the guarantor.
How come it wasn't always planned out that way?
Well, it was a way, could we were discussing, how do we get the Overlake obligation group to guarantee it? And that's what we came up with when we talked. So, yeah, I wish I would have thought about it at first, and I could be brilliant, but no, I didn't.
Well, also, because we asked ourselves the same question, we said, let's backtrack
Yeah.
why we got to the concept we were at. And it had to do with a year or more ago, there was a thought that if we went the NUCO route and the member substitution, that we may not be subject to the certificate of appeal review. But in fact, we had learned that is not true. That is not true, but that was already kind of in part of the conversation, and I think there was never a motivation to disrupt it until now.
Okay.
And now is the motivation to disrupt it, at least with challenges to it.
There are other reasons to have a NUCO, that because they're going to assume the hospital's provider agreement. They're going to do what's referred to in Medicare as a CHOW, a change of ownership. So they have to assume that, which includes all liability that goes with it. So there is some merit to keeping it in a separate organization and just having Overlake Health System guarantee the payment.
Yeah, I think that Overlake wanted just a NUCO because they would be off the hook, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think they're vacillating, although you guys may have had a conversation with them since we had that larger one, but when I talked to their attorney, he was still going back and forth as to what the best option is. The fact that you wouldn't have to have any sort of bondholder approval, I think is pushing them towards, let's just have Overlake do it.
And then Overlake, again, they're thinking a lot of different nuances, but Overlake would be the one who's writing the check, but then they would sublease it to NUCO.
By hiring that bond consultant,
Yeah,
probably helped to get the inside to
Absolutely.
yeah,
Overlake.
he was in on the call with us.
So, yeah, that was probably a good thing that we did. Is that did be able to explain everything that pointed to Overlake, so.
Has this been discussed with Medicare? This will be an acceptable way to proceed.
Yes, because Medicare has a process, it's very straightforward how you go through the change of ownership process. Yeah, so it doesn't require a discussion or a permission.
But it requires expertise, and we have Medicare experts looking at it. And our cost report prepared, and Overlake has their own cost report they're looking at. Because that is a big factor, satisfying Medicare.
Darn
right. Darn right, yeah.
So anyway, we went into that call with a lot of angst, or uncertainty.
Yeah.
Uncertainty, but it finished up with a lot of enthusiasm, like, oh, we can start seeing. So there'll be a lot more feedback on that pretty quickly.
Okay.
Anything to add?
No.
On the call too?
Yeah, no, it was a good call.
Yeah.
So within a couple of weeks, we should have some preliminary information, maybe just after July 4th or something about the document review that we're going to be doing.
The next time we
Yeah.
meet for this affiliation work study, so July 11th, that will be the one of the lead things you get is the summary of all of our review.
Cool. we get that a week ahead of time, or at least?
Yes,
after
you can
July
digest
4th?
it, yeah.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah, I'm presuming that we'll probably
I
have
think
it
we'll
by
have
then,
it.
because we want to jump
Well,
onto it.
go
And
pretty
it would be
quickly
something
on it.
nice for you to have digested.
Yeah, I think that's when we do our work as a board to make sure that we understand everything.
Absolutely.
You know, we do, once we look at it and ask questions, because that's what you should do.
You're getting ready to say something?
No, I'm just waiting. I do have a question, and that is, we got by email this document, why affiliate, as well as proposed structure and trust and all of that.
Uh-huh.
I don't see this on the agenda. Are we going to discuss
We will get
this?
to that, yeah.
Yeah.
We just aren't there yet on the agenda.
Is it on the agenda?
It's under the trust. So I'll just keep going and it'll make sense
Okay.
as we keep going.
Alright.
So the topic that we're going to spend a lot of time on tonight is the trust section.
Okay.
But just because we'll spend time there, if it's okay, I'm just going to go ahead and finish the list and then we'll come back to the trust. And that, because that's the one I've sent the slides ahead for you to look at. Because number 4, the land and building leases and then the lease transferences, there's been no action in either of those areas. They can't move forward until the definitive agreement is further along in its development. And then the certificate of need question, I shouldn't say question, the certificate of need work can't start until the definitive agreement. Tagged inside the certificate of need topic, though, is the issue about the Attorney General. You know, the new ruling, the Attorney General has to do a review of any purchase and sale agreement. So when we're at Chelan, hopefully there'll be an AWPHD rep there who may have some insight.
Okay.
And we'll start tapping in and see if we can find an informal answer to our question about
Okay.
where is the trigger for the AG review? Is it defined at the signing of the definitive agreement, or is it when the certificate of need is concluded?
Well, let's corner him or her.
Yeah, we have to find, yeah, that's what I thought, if we did it in person, we may have a better success in getting an answer. And then if that fails, then we'll see if we can find a different informal response on there.
Hopefully Ben Linda Kugel, is it very
Linda
familiar?
Kugel?
Yeah.
We'll find out.
Yeah, we'll
You know,
find
this,
out
it's
who's
all
there.
new, I mean, it just passed, you know, the governor
Oh,
has barely
okay, I
signed
missed
it,
that
so
one.
that, you know, the ink just dried. So, it's all, we will very likely be the first. If we, I was saying this earlier, we're either gonna be the last one who doesn't have to do it or the first one to do it.
Okay.
So we'll get some insight. So with that, we can go back to the trust section.
Okay,
But
please.
let me pause in case there was anything that we've gone through so far for discussion.
Questions, commissioners?
You lump together land and building leases and lease transfers, so that's one and the same topic in a way.
No, the
No, I
land
don't
and
think so.
building leases are just land and building lease. The lease transferences are the things that we currently lease, and we would be
Oh, you
transferring
mean like
that lease.
equipment?
Yes.
The equipment lease is
Okay.
primarily.
All right.
Yeah, and that's why they are separate, is because they have
I
a
understand.
different process. But we're too early to have much to say about those.
Any more questions?
All right, well, let's jump in. This is the timeline question, David, that you're bringing up. I just wanted to throw it up again.
Yeah.
So this is what you saw in May, and I told you each time that we'll just build on it. So as we saw in May, and we did have saying that the due diligence was not on track. And so then if we move it to now, I moved it back to yes, it is on track because we have it.
Okay.
Only because we have it. And so here we should be due diligence reviews, that will go July and August, and then the definitive agreement development. So right now that work is in Overlake's hands. They're the ones doing the work on that, and then we'll be seeing it start the exchange later,
All right.
later on there. And then, so July is when the trust agreement starts getting developed, and that's the reason for having that be the topic of conversation tonight, so that all of our thoughts can be collected on what are our thoughts about the trust agreement, so that those thoughts will inform as the details are being constructed.
Has the staff come up with recommendation on the trust?
we're not ready, we want to get your input on the thoughts first, and that's what's going on here.
Yeah, and just make sure you know what it is, so we can have a good conversation about it when we look
No,
at
I
it.
get to see these ice cream sandwich right here.
So this slide, the Y affiliate, as we've been talking about it, we wanted to have kind of some solid touch points that we all are using, some language, because as this goes forward, you all are gonna get asked, and the same thing we are, why are you affiliating? What's the reasoning behind it? And as we keep, walk through some of these things that we have to kind of maybe not wrestle with, but just work through, it's nice to have a reference point of why we're doing it. So that's why we grabbed this. So this is from the RFP. So this was all the work that the commissioners did on putting together those exercises a year ago. Why is it that we're doing this? And so I just copied and put this here so it would be in front of everyone. So this is not new information at all. I just thought if we just kept bringing this out in front of ourselves again and again, it may be something that's helpful that we can refer back to. But did you have a thought about it?
Well, I'd like to have clarification of spread risk and value-based contracting. I understand fully what we're talking about in item B, but what are we talking about there in value-based contracting?
Great question. Such a big motivator for going into this, and that's because CMS and all of the other insurance companies are moving towards, instead of a pay per volume of services, they pay per value.
Oh, so you're talking about us as a contractor with Medicare, Medicaid, and we need to focus now on value. Is that what you're
Yes, we are. Yes, all of us are being mandated to move towards that direction.
Okay.
And so.
I thought this was a contracting out, sort of value-based contracting out, but it's really about us.
It's about us. We will get paid based on the value of the services that we deliver.
Right.
And value is a combination of quality and cost. And so if, as a smaller entity, it is very hard to accomplish that much easier as a larger entity. So that's what that addressed.
Now, are you going to go on to each section?
In here?
Yeah.
I wasn't planning on it. I just wanted to put this in your hands, so if you want to have more conversations, just jump in.
Well, with regard to elevate brand presence, it says A, increase SVH patient loyalty and community awareness of services. I think those are kind of two separate things. When we bring in overlay, the patients are loyal to this hospital because of their experiences with us. And I don't think necessarily that bringing in overlay is going to increase Snoqualmie Valley Hospital's patient loyalty. Community awareness of services, now that's a different thing, and that's definitely what we need to do. But you see my point that it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be increased Snoqualmie Valley Hospital patient loyalty by bringing in overlay. Some people are going to object.
Commissioner Power, these are the ones we discussed a year ago.
I know, it's
and
time
was
to
put
look at.
into, that these are the things that it's like our wish list at the time, and that's one of the things that we wanted to make sure that by branding, or having brand name like overlay would increase. It's not just, we know we have our patient loyalty, but it would help increase with the branded name as well.
Well, I don't see branding here.
No, it's a elevate brand presence. This is just.
The 8th item, and it is increase Snoqualmie hospital patient loyalty. And I'm just saying that I don't think necessarily that affiliating with overlay is going to increase brand loyalty to Snoqualmie Valley Hospital. And certainly not the NUCO.
Well, I just want to have a quick word on that. I've been talking about this for at least 5 years, and everyone agrees that we need to increase outpatient services to diversify the services for the people of the community. And right now, most of our patients are the swing bed patients. So the only way this hospital will continue to be off the ground, so to speak, is to increase the outpatient services. So if you can bring in some great providers from Overlake, combine them with the providers we have, increase outpatient services, this hospital will continue to stand on its own feet. But if you don't do that, you're not going to see this hospital succeed. And I think the only way you're going to be able to grow the outpatient service volumes, which, if you do it right, you're going to get good loyalty from the people that use this hospital then. And I'm talking about services from OB/GYNs to any kind of orthopedic services. And I'm pretty sure, based on this community, Overlake is looking at this particular hospital to increase the OB/GYN for all the kids on the ridge here. And I'm pretty sure that's more of a family medicine type practice, if not in the clinics, and we've got space in the clinics. So I don't know why you would say that it would not increase loyalty if you do the service correctly.
Well, you're confusing item A and D, and I agree with you on item D, that the way we would have to grow is with outpatient services, because we have 25 beds, and it's pretty locked in.
But, and if you recall, Commissioner Paula, let me interject here. Our priority was branding. That was our first priority a year ago, and we did, I don't want to bring up our previous Astria Health. The brand name was not something that I think most of us did not feel would really draw or bring in or increase and more patient loyalty. So that is one of our priorities when CEO Parker was still here. So we all agree that's really what is needed to elevate our presence as well. So with that, I think we could move forward and we can talk some more.
Commissioner Pollard, on numerous occasions, said that branding was the key issue and that he didn't want Astria here because of that reason. So I guess.
So we can move on, because I don't want to beat a dead horse.
Madam President, I'll finish up by going to the next item, which is leverage swing bed resource.
Oh, number 3.
What does that mean in the context of the swing bed
3C?
issue? Leverage swing bed resource. How do we leverage that?
It means leverage the resources that we already have in place. We've nurtured quite an infrastructure around our swing bed programs. I think is where those thoughts came from. So we've got wound care specialists. We've got a strong pharmacy team. We've got great hospitalists. So leverage that in the growth for the next phase. That's attractive to somebody who's looking at affiliating with us. Is all of those resources that we have already in place, full of beds that are full most of the time.
Any more questions? Otherwise, we can move on.
Yeah. So this is a product that you all have already signed off on and put out there. So that this isn't for.
Well, that's true, but we have a new commissioner, and I think it's good to touch on some of these major topics.
And remind ourselves what we meant by it.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we should all reach out to Jen, to Commissioner, or to
Absolutely.
have coffee or whatever to
Keep her.
go through anything that you
Thank
are
you.
not. You're kind of in the dark or clueless
Yeah.
or something, which this is all, you're just being
Yeah.
thrown in this. So I'd
Thank you.
encourage you to just, everybody, reach out to her, see if you can spend a couple hours.
Definitely.
I sat down with President Norris already for a while. That was very helpful, so I'd like to do that too. I want to study up going into Chelan, so I'm not totally in the dark.
Okay.
Confused and scared. going into
Chelan's also for the learning. It's
Yeah.
a full,
Yeah, yeah.
you don't have to be everywhere to walk. Just absorb it.
Thanks.
All right. This is an effort to try and visually demonstrate what's proposed in the LOI. And again, just to make sure that we are all really tied in and seeing things the same way. So now this is fresh, it's the first time anybody's seen it, so this is movable and editable. But let me just walk through what we intended to grab and display, and then we can offer suggestions for changing. So using the dashed line to indicate a distinction, so what's above the dashed line on the left side of this slide, and what's above the dashed line is us as we currently are, and what's below the dashed line is Overlake as they currently are, and then I put NUCO on there as well. And then moving over to the proposed structure, which is again a distinction, so it's not a togetherness, it's a distinction, but the hospital building, which currently the hospital building houses the hospital and clinic operations. In the new proposed structure, the hospital building continues to reside in the possession of the district, and operations now swings down and becomes associated with the Overlake / NUCO entity. And in our current scenario, the income to the district comes out of operations. And in the new scenario, income to the district comes out of lease dollars.
Out of what?
The lease payments. So I'm, again, trying to produce something that can be taken out as you're asked questions, or as we're needing to kind of root ourselves or ground ourselves as we're struggling to have something to look at.
And you mentioned that OHMC will be writing the check on the lease.
That is what they left the call to go and explore. So that's not a, please don't hear me say that it was an absolute,
Okay.
but there was great enthusiasm around that. They'll come back to us.
Oh, so still
They're still,
pending.
yeah.
Until you see the document, you don't know.
Okay.
You know, that's-
I
yeah.
thought I
Everybody
thought
thought
it
Yeah,
was already-
sorry, that's why I wanted to
I thought
follow
it
up
was
and make
definitely
sure
that
that-
they will take control of making the payments, not NUCO.
That would be the
One of
best of the district.
one of the two
Best
of them.
scenario would be.
One of the two.
One of the two of them.
One of the
Overlake
two.
would be on the hook itself, not, so.
Yeah.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. But does this visually, is this helpful? Is there some other aspect to it that would be valuable to add?
Who will be, it's a NUCO, it's a whole new entity, and the experience, who will be part of who will be, if they were to write the check, if NUCO, let's say, who will be the entity or the individual or the responsible party to be handling all of that operations?
NUCO.
NUCO, someone at NUCO.
Someone at NUCO, will there be somebody from Overlake to be part of this NUCO?
Yes,
or-
because they will be the ones who birthed
Oh,
NUCO.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, I see.
Yeah, they birthed it, it's a subsidiary of them. So, yeah, absolutely.
That's a good question. I'd
Yeah,
like to
because-
know at some point who
Because
these
it's a new
folks
entity.
are.
Yeah.
Who's going to be on the NUCO board, for example? We have already our board, Overlake's board, and now we're going to have a NUCO board, are we not?
NUCO will have its board, yes.
And who are those people going to be?
Those have, their board members have not been identified. NUCO still has to be stood up as an entity.
Are we going to have any input as to who's going to be on that board?
So
But
that's
what
the
a great
model, huh?
opportunity, what a great segue to come back, because you had posed the question last time, or last work study, not this one, but the last work study, about the RCW and if there was an obligation for us to have a presence on a joint board.
That's the way I read that RCW.
Yeah, and so we said we'd walk away and we would spend some time working on it, and so while Steve and I can read it too, just like you, we really turned to Brian and Skip to help us out in understanding that. So can I just turn it over to you and let you talk us through
Yeah.
at least what we know so far about that?
Yeah, I mean, took a look at that statute as well as the remainder of that broader law. And with anything that's dealing with governmental districts or agencies, there's usually broad language to say, in this circumstance, you have authority to do all of these things. In this area, you have the authority to do all of these things. And that particular statute, 44, is really dealing with a joint venture arrangement where there's a coming together of two hospital districts, or it could be a hospital district and another entity, including a 501c3, are coming together to operate a hospital or health system or facility jointly. And so that's that portion, that section is dealing with that. There actually is a different section that I think addresses what we're dealing with, which is more of an acquisition. The statute is actually RCW 70.44.315, and that defines an acquisition to include a lease. And that's really what we're doing here. We're not coming together. I mean, certainly there are affiliations, and we talked a little bit about the use of the word affiliation, and maybe that was even a bad choice of words, because it's really a lease and an operations agreement. We're leasing the facilities and the equipment to a wholly separate, distinct entity, in this case Overlake. There's no joint venture activity. We're leasing them all the facilities, all the equipment, having an operations management agreement in essence. They're going to operate the hospital, the facilities, and the equipment. There is no joint, because you could set up you could have had Overlake and Snoqualmie say, well, you know, we want to create a new entity that's a joint entity to do that. But that wasn't what was developed. I'm guessing that wasn't anything that Overlake would have been interested in. It's not very typical with a critical access hospital and a health system that those joint arrangements just generally don't happen that way. It's an acquisition, and due to the bond structure and the funding, it really needed to be structured as a lease, at least through 2025 when the bond is callable, and then they have the option to acquire it. So it's really 70.44.315 that is the section that is going to apply here. That section does not include any language with regards to having board representation. So I think you're absolutely correct. If it was a joint venture with a new code, it was a new joint entity, then having board representation would make perfect sense and would be expected, and actually the statute would require it. However, in this case, I think of it more akin towards if you had a medical office building that you weren't using and you leased it to Overlake. There's no, gosh, we have to have a joint operating agreement. Or if you, in that particular scenario, if Overlake said, well, we want to lease your medical office building and we're going to create a new entity that we're going to be the tenant and pay the rent, and then Overlake would guarantee it, which is basically the structure that we talked about. That's how that, to me, that's probably a simpler, stripped-down version, but that's really what we have. We're leasing, we have a lease arrangement with an entity, not a joint venture arrangement.
I think NewCo makes it a
Can I,
joint venture.
excuse me for a second, just making note that Commissioner Norris arrived at 5:15 p.m. today.
So I think NewCo makes it a joint venture.
No, NewCo is just their entity. They could have put it into an existing entity. They could, well, they're even talking about, as Dr. Whitcup and Steve pointed out, they're even talking about just having Overlake assume the provider agreements in the operation of the hospital and do the lease. And so what NewCo is, it's just a subsidiary entity that they created for that purpose.
Is it necessary, because they do have their own board, to start a new board as well? So there's two boards, since they are responsible, NewCo is answering to Overlake, correct?
Correct.
Why is it necessary to have a new board on that when the representatives are coming from Overlake?
Because it's a separate, distinct legal entity, It's legally recognized as a separate entity, so it has to meet, it is a Washington, I believe, it will be a Washington not-for-profit corporation. And so it has to meet all the requirements of Washington law for Washington nonprofit corporations, all those formalities, one of which would include a board. And
Okay,
so
keeping the same players that they have.
it's possible that the NewCo board will all be also the same individuals that are on Overlake's board. It's entirely possible. In fact, I would kind of expect that. Wouldn't be required, but that would be typical.
So let me try and add this, Commissioner Paul, to your question. A joint venture would identify that you both have skin in the game, if you will. You would result either from earning profits or losses. You have no losses, risk of loss, because you're a landlord. So they don't pay the rent, there's a breach of the contract, and you can take action on that. But if they make money at this hospital, you don't get the profits. You don't get a higher percentage, unless you raise the rent because you think now the property's worth more. You could do that as a landlord. So the relationship is you're not venturing your capital or any risk. They're taking all the risk. So this is not a joint venture. It's basically a landlord-tenant, lessor-lessee transaction.
The RCW does not mention a joint venture. I appreciate the opinions that have been expressed, but it sure would be good to have those opinions in writing.
Okay. What we might want to...
Both of them.
Sure. So what we might want to do is get an opinion from MRSC then. I can reach out to them
I think that's a good idea.
and try and get another opinion, because that's Brian and it's my opinion. And it might not be, the opinion of others, but everything that we can research, everything we find.
Sure, MRSC or the Attorney General.
I'm not sure the Attorney General will give us an opinion. You have
Well,
to-
they have an own version of it. Give an opinion.
Yeah, they typically do that for like public records and open public meetings, but we can try and get you some more
That's a good idea.
information.
Well, okay, we can move
I
on.
I think that works. Let me just make one other comment. Calling this an affiliation is a misnomer, and that's created a lot of problems. This is not an affiliation. An affiliation is clearly a subsidiary arrangement, oftentimes called an offshoot or some other subsidiary relationship, sometimes even called siblings or close relationships, interfamilial. This is not an affiliation. Nowhere is the word affiliation used in the letter of intent. It's called a transaction. It's called deal points. What you're engaged in here, transaction. What this really is a transaction. And we should be calling it a transaction, but that's not, real sexy, and, the public isn't going to, oh, you're going to do a transaction with Overlake instead of an affiliation. So I think early on, and it just came to me, recently, we probably shouldn't have been calling this affiliations, because we're not affiliating with them. We're not entering into a joint venture. They're not going to be on our board. We're not going to be on their board.
When
It's
the
separate.
public asks us questions about this, they ask, how's the merger going?
And that's another good point. Yeah, it's not a merger because we're not merging.
Yeah, but
Good point.
You're right, it's not sexy to call it a transaction, and I'm not sure the public's going to be satisfied with this being a transaction.
Right, I agree. So for lack of a better word, we call it an affiliation, but it truly is not an affiliation. But for lack of a better word right now, I know you're going to call it affiliation, but I think you need to be clear and precise in your understanding. This is a transaction with deal points. Your staff are working through the deal points. Your team is trying to work now through the definitive agreement to get to those deal points. And one of those deal points that needs to be resolved then is whether or not this is a merger under the RCW 744-240. I don't think it is. I think it's under 44-315, which is an acquisition. They are acquiring the opportunity to lease a piece of property and a building and an operation.
Yeah, they don't mention merger either.
No, they don't.
44-240, but they do.
They talk
mention
about contractor joined with. We're not going to contract or join with them. We're not going to join with them. We are not joining. Not a joinder, not an agreement, we won't be attached at the hip. There's not a symbiotic relationship. It's a transaction, legal document that says you pay rent, you get to live here. Don't pay rent,
You're out.
you're out. Okay,
The
so-
place where the affiliation word though is really valuable is with our staff. So
Yeah.
with our staff
Mhm.
affiliation, because that is what their lived experience will be, is they will be bringing together what we've been and what our character is now, and blending it in, with the things that Overlake brings to the table. And so that's why, from our staff's perspective, it's the right word, but it's misleading for us. It's not descriptive of what we're actually doing. Sorry, Skip, we didn't really say something.
No, I'm done. Commissioner Paul, I don't know if that helped or.
I think the idea of getting something in writing from MRFC is a good idea.
Okay, I'll follow up.
Yeah.
I will follow up and get it back to your CEO.
Okay.
Point of,
We'll distribute that.
point of order, Madam Chair. Are you going to continue operating the meeting, or shall
I
Gabrielle
did,
take
and
over?
I did ask her, and she said, go ahead and continue.
I think it's, for continuity's sake, I think that Emma should continue.
Just
Okay,
don't know
thank you
who
for
to-
asking.
She's vice president, I think she can handle
That's
it.
fine, just don't know who to address. And that is, before we leave this page, I have one comment, but you may not be wanting to discuss this page any further.
This is for you all. This is to make
Well,
sure you feel
we mentioned
comfortable
that
with stuff with me.
on the left side there, money comes to KC PhD from operations. And over on the right side, the money comes to the hospital from the lease payment. But there's another source of money coming to the hospital, and it's only on the left side, and that's taxes. And so, what I think we have to be sensitive to is that the people in Bellevue pay no hospital taxes. Whereas the people in our hospital district all pay property taxes. And I don't know, Steve has indicated that it's not very much, but I think it is.
I never said that.
Didn't you say that? Is it substantial? How much are we getting from taxes?
We're about 3.6 million.
That is substantial.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess what I'm saying is, there's something that doesn't seem quite fair, where in terms of the financial viability of the hospital district, we're getting tax money from our people, and no tax money is coming from Overlake's people.
You don't know that.
Why would you want, I mean, the
No.
constituents of the patients are gonna be from this area who would use the hospital. Why would they
Right.
come from Bellevue?
They come from all over, if you look at the swing bed
Yeah, but
program.
They're.
I
may
just
not
think
have a
that
swing
we
bed
ought to be
program.
equally burdened, and that is, if our people are gonna pay taxes, then Overlake should consider making a equivalent contribution to the financial operation that we're both engaged in here, equivalent to what our people are paying in taxes.
But
I
they'll be paying
disagree.
tax, but they'll be paying taxes by operating through their operations, so.
Just
So,
perspective.
I mean, I don't know what you're getting at.
Okay.
Here, let me, because we get about $3.6 million in taxes every year. And they're going to pay us quite a bit. They're gonna pay us about $2 million in the lease payment, so it's comparable. And our tax revenue goes mostly to bond, tax-backed bond debts. We have excess, what Henry call excess tax revenue over debt service of about $600,000. So that's just kind of put things into perspective.
Okay. Just to remind everybody, you have 30 minutes left and 4 more pages to go over. So please make sure that our comments, our questions are direct to the point. And then we have more work study to come, so if there are some pending comments or pressures, issues, please, be mindful of it. Thank you.
So our goal tonight is to extract from you all your thoughts about the trust. And so just prompting some questions, because then we'll come back and actually put real dollars to it. But Steve, can you jump in and talk about what a trust is, and that's what I'd like to know.
Oh, yeah, a trust is an agreement you have with a independent third party, the trustee, to hold money. And they hold money that you fund, you pay them amounts. some money, or you give them initial money, or you pay monthly. They set up a fund, and they control that. And they will only release that money to certain people, certain entities for certain reasons. And you pay them to control that. And in this case, what we're setting up is a fund, a trust fund, held in trust. We're trusting them to manage it. And they will only release that to the district or to probably Overlake. We don't have, whether it's Nuco or Overlake, I would imagine it's Overlake. If certain things happen. And what we're really talking about is at the end of 5 years, about 5 years, 2025, the district bonds will be refundable. So what happens then? Well, most likely, I'm saying most likely, in the terms of the agreement, Overlake will at that point decide, okay, we want to continue or we want to walk away from this.
Or buy the hospital.
Well, basically, yeah, that continue is purchasing the hospital, refunding the bonds really is what it is,
Okay.
and purchasing the hospital. So if that happens, then, okay, maybe Overlake's, I would say Overlake's going to say, if we continue, we want some of the money in that trust account to help us defray the costs of refunding the bonds and add additional services. If they say, this really is not working for us, we need to do something else, the district will need money to restart. So the trust, money in that trust account would go towards the district to help restart hospital operations under the district. Hospital operations are still going on. District has to take them over, hire management staff and such. So it's, and that trust is saying, okay, trustee, let's say it's US Bank, they're our bond trustee. US Bank, you don't release these funds until these certain conditions are satisfied. And it's a very complicated document that says, you hold the funds, here's how you can invest them, here's, very safe and such. And you don't release them until these things happen. And these things are probably, the trigger date will most likely be September, actually, 3 months before the bonds are refundable of 2025.
So,
Go ahead, ask questions.
so at that point, do we renegotiate, do we look at, or do we go back to the old plan? Or do we wait till we get there to find out?
Well, you see what happens
All that, I
at
know.
that point. That's going to be governed by the documents, what the options are. I can speculate. I won't be 100% right if I start speculating. And you'll hold me to it. You go, well, you said. I go, well, okay.
No, my
But I
guess is
think
by
your
then you're gonna be
But
gone.
I
Your
think the
question-
question is, do we go ahead and put things in place in the definitive document now
Yeah.
that covers
Yes.
several of the options then?
Yes.
And
that-
that's-
that is-
exactly-
Definitely, that's
Definitely, yes.
be a
Okay.
major piece of the definitive agreement. And a major negotiating point is money. What happens to that excess, that $700,000 excess tax revenue over tax-backed debt service? How much of that goes into the trust account? And then our cash balance will have, at the end of this year, when this agreement takes place, about 5 to 6 million. What happens to that? What goes to the trust, what goes to the district that is not held in trust? So that's going to be a big negotiating point as we negotiate the final terms of this agreement.
So then, would the board then hear on a regular basis what the funds look like at any given time?
Yeah, I mean, you'd get, it would be a standard board report of trust account, here's what it is, here's what we're earning on it and such.
And does it also say where funds are or aren't going? I mean, is there going to be any funds coming out of that trust fund, or is it stay like a little isolated island by itself?
What a great segue you're doing to
Oh.
the conversation we need to have
All
tonight.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, no, let's move on.
Yeah. So just in the same way that you right now receive every month at Finance Committee, you get a report of how much is in our current trust fund. You see that, and so it'll continue on, absolutely.
Question, and that is, on this page, the trust, why do we need it? To support transition beyond the 2025 renewal of the definitive agreement. Now, if Overlake withdraws and loses interest, none of that money should be earmarked for adding services by Overlake or modifying the footprint under Overlake's aegis. But the cost would be returning operations to KCPHD, and that should be substantial, the greatest reason to build up that trust and hold on to it. But after 2025, I don't see that Overlake has much of a claim on the trust.
Again, that's gonna be a negotiating point. And so, Gene, I do agree, if Overlake walks away, we wouldn't say, here, take the money with you.
Or take half of it, or whatever.
No, we wouldn't even say, you can't even take 10 cents out of it, guys.
Right.
No,
You know,
legal.
yeah, if Overlake doesn't walk away, then there are rationale for how it gets divided up and such, and that's gonna be, will be a point of discussion in the agreement.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Here's a point that I want to make as far as, some of the items I'd like to see in this trust. And I would like to see if any monies are released, it's not because they're doing poorly on the books. Because that's just depleting the money and they're going to take it and run. So I would like to see that they have to have some kind of standard for operations as far as viability. And if they're doing well and they're making a profit and they want to expand their services to buy an MRI machine or something that will continue to help our community of patients, yes, then maybe that's one of the things. But they have to be making a profit. And they have to be doing well, because I don't want our money going down the toilet.
Right.
Yeah, and the viability, you also need to remember sustainability, with all that would come together into much more.
If they need to
We
spend
need to be able to sustain.
$500,000 on an orthopedic surgeon, to recruit one, to get one here, have a signing bonus, something like that, that would be something, if they're doing well, and they want to expand, I think that's exactly what we wanted to see in our planning. And that's what, so I would really, really have to have, I don't know what a normal entity would be for a profit loss for the year, but I'd like to find that information out, like, is it 4%, is it 6%? I don't know. And
A
so-
margin at the end.
Yeah.
The margin.
That's
and-
discoverable, because you
Yeah.
look at everybody's.
The best case is they're doing well, they come in, the district's doing well with their portion, and this is great, they want to expand, use the money to expand.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the best outcome for everyone.
So that's kind of what I was thinking, but I don't know if anybody else has other ideas, but I would not want to give them money if they're not doing well. So,
All right, I think we did.
And that's exactly what we're
That we're
proposing
done
here, is what are the
proposing,
scenarios where
Okay.
you would want to do adding, after 2025, is it for adding services, modifying, you guys hit it, and even if you walk away.
I know, that's 7 years away, and that's gonna go by very quickly.
6.
6 years away.
Yeah,
Remember,
that's it.
Roger McCollum was here for 12 or 14 years, and it went by very quickly. So this is just, tomorrow. Yeah.
Just keep us going, because
Yes,
we have some
please.
momentum
Thank you.
going here. And we don't need to read through this, but this is just from the LOI. This was the section of the LOI that talked about the trust. And there are two, I identified by the number 1 and the number 2 there, that there's a portion of in excess of LTGO bond service and a portion of our unrestricted cash that's not yet determined. That's what our conversations here and next time are going to be around, is starting to get some determination around that. But then now we're just posing thoughts about how we go about funding the trust. Like, how do we determine what the amount is? What is the right amount at the end? that we want to have. As Steve and I have talked through it, we said, we need to sit down and figure out, what does it cost us to assume operations again and sustain ourselves for 6 months? Because it'll take us that long to start getting dollars back in, recruiting costs.
And buy
payment.
Steve Daniels off of retirement to come back and help us do that.
Maybe so, that's right. Depends, 6 years from now, you may have forgotten everything about Gatsby that he knows.
Well, I think you kind of got to look at, let's say you wanted to expand into orthopedics. What is this 4-slice MRI cost and the signing bonus in 6 months of pay?
Yeah, no,
I think that's, you know, kind of, I don't know what that is, but I would imagine about $500,000.
For just those pieces?
Just the signing bonus and then the machine, what's that,
The MRI?
50,000 or 100,000? 150.
Yeah, we have one already, so we're
But
going to go
a
on.
higher resolution.
They actually are pretty happy with this one.
Okay.
They would want an OR.
Okay.
They want an OR, which is where your
Okay.
couple
So that-
$1 million
yeah,
are
so-
going to come from.
Yeah, so that, all of those costs, I think that's what you kind of look at, what your trust account.
These would be things we wouldn't be
Think we
willing
want
to toss
yeah,
out, so.
yeah.
And then if there's any other types of, I think that would be a good starting point. I think that's probably the most expensive service that you could start out.
Madam Chair, may I?
Sure.
To me, thank you. To me, I think that we need to start asking. We need to start asking our community. We need to say, what is it, if you need some kind of health care that you're not getting locally, what is it that you would want? I think orthopedics is probably one that all the parents would say, but still, we need to go out and let them know, we want it to meet their needs. And we haven't done an assessment in a while, the wellness assessment, we haven't updated it. I think some questions like that need to be asked as well.
And so that was it last time or the time before, that we went through the market analysis, because that's data, data-driven, as far
Okay.
as what are people in this community who live in this zip code, what services is it that they are going in search of and going beyond us?
Are
Or
we
that
still,
could be delivered here.
are we
because we
still
get that information.
continuing that community engagement within our district?
Oh,
Or
absolutely.
What are we doing then?
Every week.
Okay,
But we're
so you're
here,
finding more and more
we're here
topics and
late
issues
on
that
our
we-
community
excuse me
health
for a
needs
second.
assessment.
Yes, brought that up before.
I think
Yeah.
that's what Commissioner's getting.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yes.
Can you talk about the contributions by district, by So is that something that we're going to consider, whether we will contribute to the funding of the trust?
So the trust will be funded by us. So the LOI, I'm just gonna take you back. The
Okay.
LOI says that we will fund the trust with number 1 and number 2. Number 1 and number 2. So we, the district,
Yeah.
will create a trust account that is funded by, number 1, a portion of the tax revenue in excess of our LTGO bond service, and number 2, a portion of our unrestricted cash balance.
Why
So
doesn't Overlake have skin in the game?
Yeah, my question is,
Because this
how much
is
are
a
they bringing
joint
to the
venture.
table?
And you've got to realize, Overlake is taking the business risk. Again, our income for 5 years is flat, there's paying a lease. Overlake takes the business risk. I would say, Commissioner to Pollard, and I don't think he's not already mandated, but just to answer your question, they're taking the business risk on this thing.
Well, if you look at these triggers, it looks to me like they're not taking many risks.
Okay, well, the other thing you got to consider, if this trust was used for operating room, who owns operating? We do. So they don't own it. And, that's, they're building, they're going to build it, and we own it. So I would think if the trust is going to pay for anything, it should be paid for things that we will end up owning, regardless, unless we
Right.
sell the hospital. So.
Becomes a fixture, permanent fixture. Okay.
It feels
Yes.
like in that,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
ma'am,
Okay.
could you please go back to the Because in that paragraph there, right in the middle, it says, the purpose is a safety net for OMC against possible operational losses, which I think is the opposite of what you had just said, Secretary Spikers, about we don't want to bail them out if they
Yeah, but
have
that's,
lost. Am I misunderstanding?
no, but that's what I want. Whether LOI doesn't mean anything,
Okay.
okay?
Mhm.
It doesn't mean a squat.
Okay.
So what I
How
want
do you
and
feel
what the
about that?
board wants is a whole different ballgame. They can go and look at that all they want, but what we really want
Yeah.
is,
Okay, so this is not any sort of a governing
No.
document for
No.
us then?
This is just
Just
kind of
a guiding
what,
structure to get
what,
it
what we
started.
thought,
Yeah.
what we might
Okay.
put in.
Yeah.
Again, the negotiation's really gonna be over that definitive agreement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Pollard?
These tough points, and there are tough points in it.
Yeah, no, I think, I guess we're not having a dinner here tonight then, are we?
We are.
Yeah.
I want to hear Brian.
I have a comment with regards to this, with regards to possible operational losses. If you tie that to some of the trigger points, like CMS, critical access hospital certification, if we were to lose that, lose the swing beds, lose or have a change in that sort of reimbursement, that is what ties to that.
that's possible. So if we lose all of our
So-
reimbursement,
So it's not just, they come in and they don't do a good job running it, which is to the point you were making, they have to do a good job, then the dollars wouldn't go for that. Under that point, it would only go if suddenly, for whatever reason, we lost our critical access hospital status and got switched over to prospective payment, and that caused a big downturn in reimbursement. Then that's what that would be.
so it does mean squat, but not in the sense what we were worried about.
Yeah, it's not just if they come in and they're bad at their job, it doesn't cover that. But if the government changes the rules of the game and they look at $1 million loss, that I think they would say would be a proper use of that funds.
And what
Okay, so
Steve has been
Commissioner
saying.
Pollard has
Well, I
something to
just
say.
think that we don't have time to go through these item by item. Mr. Spikers,
I just wanted to hear Dr. Whitcoff, what she said, what she was going to say.
Oh, but just as what Steve has been saying, that so much of the details here will wind up in the definitive agreement, it being with a great clarity, because the whole funding your losses has been a sensitive point, I think, for all of us. I wanted to make sure that's really, really clear what that
Okay.
means.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think it's appropriate that Commissioner Jan call our attention to that section of the LOI. But at any rate, since we're about to run out of time, I hope that we'll be able to discuss this final item here on the page. Actually, each of these items need to be discussed. We're running out of time. Maybe because I talked too much, but basically, it says here, following a mutually agreed dispute resolution process. Now, that could be very important, and I think, I would hope that a definitive agreement is not signed until we actually have a dispute resolution process that we've mutually agreed to.
So in the definitive agreement, there will be all kinds of conversation and discussion around these points and more. So this was created just as a list to kind of get everybody's thoughts, understand what's being thought. But this is no way the final grouping.
Commissioner Pollard made a good point, because almost every contract you sign has a dispute
Right.
resolution process, and they're very important.
Very important.
You three know this.
Every agreement has.
Yeah, everyone has one, yeah.
So I flipped ahead just because that was part, we were having a conversation about the dissolution agreement. But this is the one slide, I feel like we've talked about it a lot already, about are there options to make withdrawals before the term concludes and under what conditions? And you started, David, taking us down some of those ideas. But the concept of it has to be for sustainability and for continued improvement,
Right.
and already with in a
And quality.
scenario of good performance,
Yep.
good quality, but anything else to add into those thoughts?
Well, the quality should be at least the standard of care that we're accustomed to
Yes.
providing in this hospital. And that, we we want some awards, and I would expect that nothing less.
Mhm. Thank you for that.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Norris.
To me also, that the staff right now, I'm concerned about staff. I really am. The staff, people some of them live in the community, some live just in the perimeter, that the staff could possibly just, that we could keep them here, or some of our staff, most of our staff. That they wouldn't come in and change everybody out.
Oh, they
Oh, no.
won't do that. They've made it very clear
Okay.
that they don't have anybody extra to bring.
That's good by me.
Yeah, they don't.
They wouldn't be able to do
They're-
it without.
Give the
Their
stability.
concern,
Yes.
their concern is, will all your staff stay? Because if they don't stay, then we overly have a problem.
Okay.
When you say your staff, don't our staff become their staff at that point?
But before we get to
Before-
that,
right now
they're
they're
still
ours.
ours.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're still ours, but.
Yeah, so they're equally desiring that everything stay in place. Yeah, the secret sauce is this team that's here right now.
I think it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, they-
and that's
they
just
acknowledge
where
that.
business negotiations happen. Then later down the road, they'll probably will bring their own if they have enough staff.
I think they would
I think
only
they
bring
will. Are
their
they
own
gonna keep
because
them?
there's
I
a
hope.
gap that needs to be filled. They
Okay.
have no intention to come
I
in
hope
and exit people. No, in fact, they're coming in a few weeks, I can't remember when it's on the calendar. They desperately want to learn from us, they want to learn how we do things. They know about us, they just want to see what it's like on the inside.
May I ask another question?
Sure, Commissioner Norris, please do.
It sounds like they want to, it sounds like they appreciate who we are and that they want to keep it that way, correct? So I guess I lost my other thought. So that was my concern, is that they appreciate what we have and that they don't just come, it doesn't work out, and then up and leave. And then we have some staff that might be displaced or not, I mean, when you're used to working at the same place as many years as some of our staff has. I mean, I don't know a lot of hospitals that give away 25 or 15-year pins.
Well, remember what Steve said just a few minutes ago, and that what they're walking into is taking on the operational risk. And the operational risk is very dependent on you maintaining
On the staff performance
a great staff.
measurement
I'm
objectives.
sorry, what did you say, the operational risk depends very much on?
It's very dependent on your staff,
Yes.
on you being able to have the skill sets and the performance, maintain the excellence and the quality that you brought up.
And then there's one other point I would like to have this trust.
Perfect.
As a landlord myself, I would like to have a walkthrough, and if there are damages that were not taken care of to the building, or maintenance has not been kept up, that trust is not released.
Gotcha.
And inventory.
So I would like to have
Yeah,
a very
inventory.
thorough walkthrough from our staff and theirs, and sign off on everything about the building that is in perfect tip-top shape.
What time frame are you talking about? At the start, middle, the end?
Well, I would want it before, absolutely.
Before and after.
Madam Chair, let me recognize
I would like to
Commissioner.
see, to make sure that, what if they trash,
Okay.
no one reports a bunch of damage, and they put a Band-Aid on a couple of things, and
This kind of goes to what you've been saying on other areas. They have to maintain the building. The trust would not be used for any maintenance, routine maintenance, and upkeep of the building. They have to maintain it.
Right.
And if they don't, certainly there's no distribution from the trust.
right.
Okay, Commissioner Norris.
Please. We just talked about facilities committee, this last facilities committee, that we don't even have our permit for actual occupation or occupancy.
Or permanent
Yeah,
occupancy.
permanent.
occupancy.
So that's got to be all cleaned up before this.
We'll clean it up, I
Yes.
promise.
Okay.
We're close.
Okay. All right, thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner Norris.
Sure, caused me stress, Daryl.
I'm sorry, that was at that meeting. What do you mean we don't have supervision?
That was an
No,
hour.
why did you?
Oh,
Sorry, we
okay.
did a little ping-ponging back and forth, but I think that
And
this was what we wanted to grab
all
because now.
all of the legal compliances, everything, all the mandates that are required by law
For survey.
are continue to be in place and not in arrears, so to speak. I don't know if they screw something up and the fire department says, well, you gotta get this fixed up here in the next 3 months, and then they want to release the trust fund. We go, wait a minute, we got something from the fire department that says you've got to put in 25 sprinklers. You haven't done that.
Yeah.
So legal compliance with any of the
Codes, inspections.
codes, inspections, and
Regulations is,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Appreciate
We're
it.
struggling with that right now a little bit. Okay, we have 8 minutes to go. So do we cover the section of LOI, the solution triggers, the last page? Right there.
Yes, it was not intended to be something to be covered, as much as to prompt, just to
Oh, okay.
visually prompt to see if there were other things that you wanted to bring out that aren't already represented there.
You know, look at a commercial lease agreement. I've got a 38-pager. You can probably find some things in there to hold them to. So,
Oh, yeah. Bond documents.
Well, and keep in mind, I mean, the trust document's just one. I mean,
Right.
the definitive agreement then
Right.
breaks down to the 2 leases
Yeah,
and the
that's-
trust. Yeah.
absolutely, but I don't want to lose any money just because.
Because he's a tightwad.
I'm sure we can find
Right,
an extra
yeah.
in that lease.
Yeah.
Brian, is there
right.
anything that you wanted to make sure that we heard from you tonight? Because I know we don't always get to have you here.
No, I think we pretty much covered that. I mean, you know, the process at this point, you had the timeline, and there was certain parallelism, but we've probably given more data and documentation for due diligence review, so they're further along on that. But that doesn't mean we're slowing down on, well, you've gotten a lot of work done, groundwork for the trust agreement and the affiliation agreement. Those are the 2 that are really moving forward. So I think in some ways, if you looked at a timeline, it looks like, oh, maybe we're getting a little out of sync, but we're really not. So I think we're.
Well, it's
I
good
think
to
we're
hear
doing well.
because I remember that first meeting, you said, you need to make sure that we're moving on schedule.
Yeah.
Madam President. I think also we need to have some timelines in there. For example, loss of critical access status, that could be proposed by the government. We might have 3 to 6 months to appeal. We need to have something in there about, would we continue doing an appeal, or could they walk out tomorrow? I think, some of those timelines need to be built into the, like, loss of swing bed status. Well, that might be a 6-month process or a year's process. Would we still be protected during that time, or would they have the right to walk away?
One of the reasons for a trust account and funding is a soft landing, and the terms of the agreement need to, say if it doesn't go back, the soft landing is what you want. So
Yes, exactly.
build those in.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And along the line, are you finished?
Yes, ma'am.
And along the line of the trust agreement, I don't know, if the tenants improvement, for example, they're gonna build a new, if that is something that could be added, that the tenants will pay for any improvements made to the hospital, not the landlord. So I'd like, if that is to be
Yep.
included, I think that's important.
Yeah,
to
I
make
put-
sure, so there's
Yeah.
clarity.
I included some language that the trust would not be used for maintenance or just keeping the facilities
Okay.
in place. That's gonna be their operational expense. That's their operational requirement. It would only, I suppose if there was some fluky thing in some catastrophe, but basically, we're giving them a building in a certain condition that's virtually brand new, and they're gonna be required on their side, that's their risk, to keep the operations and keep the facilities at this level or better. And that's not what the trust fund is intended to use. That's what you were looking for.
Right, right,
Yeah.
just wait until they don't go back farther, oh, by the
Correct.
way, he made some improvements, it was not on our, blah, blah, blah.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Any other questions that we have? It is now 6:00. I guess we started 3 minutes late, but we're okay.
All right.
Any other? Okay. Meeting adjourned.
Move we adjourn?
We moved to